In my view, a life was lost needlessly, and I don't see that there's being much done about his death in view of the fact that he was shot and killed and did not fire on the person who shot him. He was shot several times, and as I understand it, he was moving away from the people who shot him or person who shot him and not posing any threat or any danger to them. And I just wonder how you could shoot somebody so merciless, when even though they have a gun, they're avoiding you. They're trying to retreat and go away. They weren't on his property. He laid there. He died a horrible death because there was a hospital 5 minutes away, which could have, sent an ambulance much quicker. The police, as I understand it, did not initiate CPR at all. That was not started until the ambulance crew arrived. So that was time lost and wasted that possibly could have saved my son's life. I'm upset because when I asked for answers, I got none. I wasn't notified of my son's death until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He died at 3:15 a.m. I've asked the detective and the officer who came to my house to inform me about my son's death. I asked why it took so long to tell me. You've had almost 12 hours. Why couldn't you have notified me sooner? And I said, you could have called me if nothing else. He said, we don't call. I said, but, and we couldn't, they tell me they couldn't find Brandon's contact information because he hadn't, quote unquote, been in any trouble or much trouble in the past, so he wasn't in the system. But yet they were interviewing my son's best friend who did have my contact information because he was a former neighbor. They didn't bother to ask that person how to get in touch with Brandon's mother, his parents, stepfather, and that, in my opinion, created a great delay in my finding out about my son's unfortunate death, which in my opinion is murder. If someone's retreating and not posing a threat or danger to you, how are you justified in shooting that person 3 times, which results in death? That's not fair. I asked the detective, when I spoke with him, how do you feel? I mean, I hate playing the race card because I would like to think that my tax dollars support an honest, upstanding law enforcement agency. And I said, but I don't feel like, in this case, my son was treated fairly. He was treated like an animal. He was shot like an animal, allowed to lie there on the ground in pain for whatever minutes he had left after his shooting, and to lie there and die without anybody intervening and trying to save his life. And that, as a parent, is very disturbing to me. The officer denies, of course, that race had any bearing or any part in that, but I, as a black woman, and knowing that the stereotypical image they create for young black men, I know that everything's not done. And I told him that stereotype, and the reason why he's not in your system, your criminal system, is because he wasn't a bad kid. All young people make bad decisions, and I'm sure that based on that, his immaturity, he wasn't making the best choices in life. We had multiple discussions about his choice of friends, the activities that he was involved in. But he was a young man that had a future ahead of him. He worked hard. He was a full-time employee at the university, which kept that beautiful football field, at its glory and its beauty. And I feel like, he was a productive member of society. He wasn't your average thug and criminal. This young man finished high school. He was on the team when they won state championship at Hickman High School, and was still considering the option of college. I mean, life wasn't over for him. It was just beginning, and it was cut short. And I'd like for some people to answer for that. At midnight last night, there had been no arrest made. Hopefully today there will be arrest made, and somebody will pay for my son's life. And I don't want to have to be the one to seek revenge. I want the law to do their job. That's all I'm asking.
And as a follow-up question on that, how would you evaluate the Columbia Police Department's handling of your son's death?
I would rate them very poorly at this point. I would like for everyone to know that I have seen other cases handled in a much more timely fashion, and he sustained life-threatening injuries. What kind of a person who's trained to administer CPR and has those skills does not administer that when they approach a scene? I mean, were they worried about getting blood on their hands? That's why they have latex gloves, rubber gloves. What was the problem? What was the reason that they could not intervene to help save my son's life at the point when they arrived? They didn't need to wait for an ambulance to arrive. They could have begun life-sustaining measures, and they did not. And that's a sad thing, because I wonder if it were a Caucasian person, would their life have meant more? I mean, would it have? That question will always remain.
And where did you get your information from that the police did this? Because they're not telling me anything. I mean, did
they haven't told me anything. His friend that was present during this whole entire mess called me last night, and I asked him all the specific questions and why he hadn't called me earlier. He said he was detained by the police and questioned from the beginning of the crime shortly after and until shortly before he made the phone call to my home.
So you got a reliable source.
Yes, I got it from the horse's mouth, so they say. But he told me that I asked how long my son lay there. He said about 30 minutes. He said he sat up and then he fell backwards and never moved again. I don't understand why trained professional people could not have tried to stop bleeding, start CPR, reassured him, comforted him, at least allow my son to die in a humane fashion rather than like a damn animal, because he's not an animal. He was a good kid who made some bad choices. And even older adults make bad choices and decisions. So you can't expect a 25-year-old to be perfect. I don't claim that he was perfect, but he didn't deserve to die the way they allowed him to die. And I do blame and fault the Columbia Police Department for that.
And the murderer.
And let's talk about Brandon a little bit. He was a good kid. I mean, he had a job, you said, and
full-time job.
Where was he working?
He worked for the university, the groundskeeping. They maintained all the grounds for the university and kept all the beautiful grass and all of the football field and everything else maintained. So he had a lot of, they wanted him to go and obtain his horticulture degree, but he just was young and wild. He wanted to sow his oats, and I told him once he settled down, maybe we could talk again, and periodically we would revisit, the possibility of him going to college. And I always told him, he could always come home, and I would help him and support him whatever way that I could so that he could have a good life, a better life. And I told him my past experience, a single mom. I went through, 2 nursing programs and achieved things against all odds. And he didn't have any children. He only had himself. And he had a home to come to if he wanted to further his education. That was always an option for him. He didn't have the lack of family support, because I have been there for my son for 25 years, and nothing would have changed up until the day of his death. Nothing had changed.
I don't have any further questions. I think you've said it all. Unless there's something else you'd like to say.
I just want justice to be served. And I don't think, as a mother, a grieving mother, that's asking too much. I don't want this to be swept under the rug like Trayvon Martin. I want justice. And I am going on my way to speak with the detective at the Columbia Police Department regarding this case in hopes of finding out more information, because as I understand it right now, those people are free. Probably not even on bond, but they're free. Will they kill again? Who knows?